Right, so in today's video we're going to be doing a full renovation on this lawn now that it's the start of autumn. If we just have a little look around the entire space, you can see that for the most part it's in fairly decent condition. It's not the best lawn in the world. There's a bit of weed grass knocking about, but for the most part the actual weeds that we did have, so for example this one down at the front, which is pretty much on its way out now, have been killed by the weed application that we got on this lawn with about 2 weeks ago. But before you do start a process like this, you need to be asking yourself the question, why? Why are you getting on and renovating the space? Because depending on the type of lawn you have is going to depend on the things that you need to actually do to it. With this being a ryegrass lawn, it doesn't actually produce a massive amount of thatch. I mean, it still does, but it's nowhere near to the extent of like a bent grass or a fescue grass. But what it does sometimes suffer with is overcrowding, and that's where when you've overseeded the lawn, if you put a little bit too much seed down, what can happen is when you're feeding it through the summer, that grass can almost become slightly too dense, and if you leave it like that over the winter, what you're leaving your lawn susceptible to is things like disease and moss growth. So what I want to do is thin the sward out ever so slightly, but then I also want to overseed as well. And the reason why I'm going to be getting on and actually overseeding it too is because this type of grass isn't going to be able to reproduce itself. It's not a plant that you're necessarily going to be able to prune because it doesn't produce rhizomes or stolons. So what we are going to have to do to fill in those spaces is to overseed, but the quantity of plants is going to be less than what we currently have in this space now. So the first thing you're going to want to do before you actually get on with your scarifier is to take your mower and just cut your lawn a little bit shorter than you usually would. If I was to get on now with the scarifier, what's going to happen is the blade's just going to be fighting against the actual grass blades that we already have here. So by taking it down a little bit lower than usual, it just means that we can actually thin out the sward and also remove a little bit more thatch much more easily. So there we go, just getting close to the sward. Now you can see, even with this space being completely scalped, just look how dense all those plants really are. So just reinforces exactly why we're going to be thinning this sward out today. Going to be using the Iron Hell cordless scarifier today. This is a 36 volt cordless machine. It's pretty decent, to be fair. It's got a few different height settings on it, but what you're kind of going to want to do is keep your scarifier on the highest setting, and then as you go slowly bring that level down. You don't need to bring it down all the way to the bottom. You'll kind of get a good idea as to how deep you really need to scarify once you've done the first couple of passes. Now what I would recommend is going in an alternate direction to what you usually mow. However, just for convenience on this space, I'm going to do one way the way I usually cut, then I'm going to go across in the alternate direction as well. So what this has kind of done so far is, because we've only gone on the highest setting with the scarifier, we've not really dug into the soil very much. I mean, in some places we have, that's just where, you know, the soil's a little bit higher and slightly uneven in spaces, which is always going to be the case when the soil settles over time. But for the most part, what we've just got here is the thatch that's sitting, you know, a little bit higher in the sward, but also as well, it's a lot of that vertical growth too. Now, when it comes to ryegrass, there isn't a massive amount of vertical growth in terms of with stolons and with rhizomes and whatnot, but obviously inevitably the plant's going to lie sideways and branch sideways at times, so it's just nicking all that lateral growth that there is and about on the lawn. So when we get on with the scarifier for the next pass, we'll drop it down another level, and that way it's going to then start to dig a little bit further into the soil, and it's less about ripping thatch out on this space with it being rye. It's more about making a bit of a seed bed for those new seeds, because you want little channels in your lawn for the seeds to just fall into, because then over the next week or so those little spaces will close themselves up, even though they'll be covered with top dressing as well, and it's going to mean we're going to get a higher chance of good germination across the space. If you notice a lot of green growth in what you've scarified out, that's going to be obviously existing plants and not thatch. And when you think of people getting on and vertically cutting the lawn, effectively what I've just done there is a verticut as opposed to a scarify. Yep, I've scarified as well kind of at the same time, but both of those processes are very, very similar, more similar than what you would think. There's a lot of interesting information online or differences between the two, and everyone's going to have their own opinion, me included. But yeah, it's the more you tend to research about it, the more interesting that topic seems to get. So dropping it down just one notch, give it a second pass. It's always a good idea just to use your lawnmower as well, a little bit like a hoover, just to get those last little bits of thatch and dead grass off the lawn. And that's why you get on with your mower right at the end, because look how much there has come off as well. So we're using a drop spreader today to put the seed down. It's the best thing because it's not going to flick the seed into your flower beds or even onto the road. It's just going to drop exactly where you want it to go. And we're using this grass seed mix from the Grass People as well. It's 80% ryegrass, 20% creeping red fescue. Now fescue is a really good variety to have within your lawn because it is going to have rhizomes that are almost like little stems that go underneath the, well, not stems, like runners that go underneath the soil ever so slightly, and then it comes up with new parent plants. And creeping red fescue is a grass variety that you can prune. 99% of ryegrasses you can't prune in that same way, so it's always good to have it in there because that helps almost like knit the lawn together. And then verticutting sort of makes a bit more sense when you have that variety in there too. So this is their Superstar back lawn mix in case anyone's interested. It's not a sponsor or anything. I'm not going to put like a set amount down. All I'm going to do is just kind of put a rough amount down. I might do 2 passes with this spreader because I don't want to put too much seed down. It's only to slightly thicken the lawn back up. And that probably comes to one of the questions that I guess a few people might have, is why have we thinned out the lawn to then thicken it back up? And the main reason is because with ryegrass, it's like, well, with any grass really, it's finding that balance between, you know, it not being too thin but not being too dense either. You almost want to like find that balance that's perfect in the middle. And with the ryegrass space in particular, often when you are doing like a renovation, let's say in spring, you sometimes overdo it on the seed, you sometimes overfeed throughout the spring and throughout the summer, which gives you that really dense sward. And then it comes to autumn now where we have to thin the sward out, but we almost thin it out too much and we don't want the lawn going into winter in too much of a vulnerable state. Hence why we get on, put a little bit more seed down onto the space to try and find that perfect balance. And there are times where overseeding isn't really necessary, but if I leave these spaces now, this grass is not a creeping grass at the moment. Like I said, there's a little bit of fescue in there, but not a massive amount. So by filling it back up with a bit of fescue, a bit of rye, all be happy days. And because we've actually scalped the lawn and stressed the entire space out, what it's going to mean then is that these grass plants are going to take a little bit longer to recover because they're in that state of stress at the moment. And the fact that they're going to take longer to recover means that it gives these seeds a good chance at germination. If you do leave your grass too long, the likelihood of getting germination from your seed is next to none. So it's all about giving this seed a fighting chance. Now I've got this spreader on the highest setting, which is 18, big enough for the actual seeds to fall out of. So yeah, let's give it a couple of passes, see how we get on. And the last thing you're going to want to do to round off your renovation is to actually top dress the space. Getting on with a bit of compost or a bit of topsoil is going to help to actually prevent birds getting to it, and it'll also enable that seed to have better seed to soil contact, which is ideal. And what you can do now is just take your bag and dump it onto the lawn and rake it about. However, what you can do is spend a ridiculous amount of money on something that you're only going to use once or twice a year, which is completely overkill, but it's pretty convenient. And that's this, which is a compost spreader. Now, I'll be really honest, it's it's a boss bit of kit. You can buy really cheap ones as well, which is always handy. It does exactly what you want it to do, and if you've got a massive space and you've got the cash spare, then I would recommend picking yourself one up, because you know, if you've got a ryegrass lawn and you're renovating every year, once or twice a year, and you're going to be doing it for the foreseeable future, then it is a good investment to actually make, because it just makes your life a little bit easier when it comes to putting the compost down onto your lawn. And what it's going to do, it's going to sift out any of those larger pieces of compost. And that's one thing I really like about the compost spreader, is the fact that you just can get on with one bag of compost on a space this size. I mean, that's 15 square meters, but you saw I just put the excess down on this side. It doesn't really matter if I put a little bit more down in certain spaces than others. Well, that's probably enough to cover about 20 square meters. And what's key as well when you get on top dress is that the existing grass pokes back through your top dressing, because what you don't want to do is you don't actually want to be smothering the space completely, because you can cause some of your existing grass to die back, which obviously you don't want. You want that to be able to thrive, but also as well for your new seeds to be able to germinate too. So all we need now is a little bit of rain just to help keep this space nice and moist over the next couple of weeks, which the weather has given it to be. At time of recording, it does give quite a cold week next week, but because we're still only in early September, those temperatures are going to be coming right back up again by the end of September, and usually October is fairly favourable as well. So hopefully some of these new seeds can germinate and mature before we get to the back end of October into November and through to the winter. So thanks for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, feel free to give it a like. If you haven't already, consider subscribing. I will be posting the video in the next week or two to show you the progress of this space and what it's looking like after the renovation. I do have some videos on my channel as to when I did something very similar this time last year. So if you've got itchy feet and you kind of want to see what it is going to look like, then check out those videos. And yeah, as ever, the Instagram is in the description below. Finally, thanks for watching.